Her son leaned in at the funeral and said, "Now we can finally sell her house." Helen Roth, widow and retired nurse, didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "Already did. And not to you." By sunrise, his name was erased from the deed, the trust, and every joint account he thought he'd inherited. She'd buried her husband with grace. Now, she was burying the illusion that her son ever deserved what she built. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The air hung thick with salt and rain. Charleston's gray skies pressing low over the cemetery like a lid on a simmering pot. The preacher's voice echoed through the rows of black umbrellas, reciting scripture with rote finality. Helen Roth stood alone beside the casket, her gloved hands folded neatly at her waist, not clutching tissue or pearls, just stillness. Her expression was unreadable. Weathered, yes, but unbroken. The casket gleamed in the muted light, deep cherrywood polished to a finish so reflective, it mirrored the faces of those who came to pay respect and stayed to speculate. Behind her, Tyler Roth stepped forward, all polished shoes and practiced grief. His dark suit looked expensive but unearned. He leaned in as the final verse was spoken, his breath warm and sour from whatever he'd poured into a coffee tumbler earlier. "Now we can finally sell her house," he murmured. Helen didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply turned her head an inch, just enough for him to see the edge of her calm. "Already did," she said. "And not to you." Tyler pulled back as if slapped, a twitch in his jaw betraying the smile he forced onto his lips when other mourners glanced over. Casey, standing a few feet behind with her heels sinking into the damp grass, saw the exchange but only caught scattered words. Still, suspicion rippled across her expression, sharp and calculating. Helen didn't offer explanation. She didn't owe any. Rows of white chairs emptied slowly. A cousin spoke in soft tones to someone who hadn't been around since the wedding. A neighbor dabbed her eyes and looked anywhere but at the family. Jenna Roth, 17 and unshelled by makeup or performance, stood stiff near the canopy tent. Her dark curls were pulled into a nervous ponytail, her expression tight as she studied the way her father's eyes narrowed toward Helen. Something silent passed between grandmother and granddaughter, something shared. And then came the click of heels. Dolores arrived late, as always, a navy coat thrown over her shoulders, gray curls pinned up in imperfect waves. She kissed Helen's cheek without hesitation, her lipstick leaving the faintest imprint on Helen's temple. "Did they start circling yet?" Dolores asked, voice dry enough to cut. Helen gave the barest tilt of her head toward Tyler. "He flew in for the eulogy, stayed for the assets." Dolores's smile didn't reach her eyes. Typical. He always did think inheritance was a birthright, not a consequence. As the crowd thinned, Casey stepped forward, looping her arm through Tyler's. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice sugary but pitched. Helen faced them fully now, her expression blank as snowfall. "Lovely service. Pastor did a fine job." Tyler studied her like she was a locked cabinet. "You didn't invite anyone back to the house." Helen looked down at her husband's name etched into the bronze plaque at the foot of the grave. "No one's going back to the house," she said. "That chapter's done." Casey's smile cracked, eyes flicking toward Tyler, then back. "Is it?" Before anyone could respond, thunder rumbled in the distance. Not enough to scatter the guests, but enough to end the pretense. Helen turned to Dolores. "You still have that umbrella in your trunk?" "Of course," Dolores said. "And a flask." They walked off together, slow and deliberate. Behind them, Tyler opened his mouth, then shut it again. He looked at Jenna as if she might offer him clarity. She didn't. She simply raised one eyebrow the same way Helen used to when people underestimated her. Back at the grave, a gust of wind lifted the edge of a prayer card. It fluttered once, then landed at Tyler's feet. He picked it up and stared at the photo. His father, younger and stronger, smiling beside Helen in front of the house he now realized wasn't his to claim. A new tension bloomed in his Gutanese and unfamiliar. Jenna turned and walked toward Helen. And behind them all, Casey pulled out her phone. The kind of call you only make when you feel a rug slipping fast. The rain had dried by mid-afternoon, but the streets of Charleston still gleamed like polished slate. Tyler's SUV pulled into Helen's quiet cul-de-sac, with the urgency of someone returning to collect what's already his. He didn't park in the driveway, He didn't have the right tone out anymore. Casey sat beside him, tapping a chipped nail against her phone screen, half listening to a podcast she wasn't actually playing. Her sunglasses were still perched on her head, though the sun had disappeared hours ago. "Are we seriously doing this today?" she asked, already stepping out. Tyler didn't answer. He moved fast, key already in hand as he ascended the porch steps. The hydrangeas Helen always trimmed herself were in bloom, annoyingly vibrant. He shoved the key into the deadbolt and turned. Nothing. Again. It stopped halfway stuck, unmoved. He yanked it out and muttered, "She must have jammed it." Casey joined him, arms crossed. "Try the other one." He did. A brass key, slightly worn at the teeth. Click. Twist. Nothing. The locks had been changed. Inside the house, Helen sat at her kitchen table, still in her funeral attire. Her laptop was open, a mug of tea half full beside her, untouched. She scrolled calmly through tabs. Dominion Power, Charleston Water, Spectrum Internet. One by one, she deleted saved logins, removed backup emails, disabled Tyler's access, unlinked Casey's phone number from the billing alerts. No drama, no spectacle, just methodical clicks of goodbye. A soft chime from her phone. "Miss Radner. Radner. R.E. Escrow funds deposited at 2:48 p.m. We're clear. Closing scheduled Thursday, 10 a.m. Helen smiled, folded the laptop shut. Outside, Tyler stepped back and surveyed the windows like he was being robbed by his own mother. "She changed the damn locks," he said. Casey narrowed her eyes. "No alarms going off. You think she moved already?" Tyler stepped off the porch and walked the perimeter like a man inspecting a hostile border. Every curtain was drawn, every sign of invitation scrubbed clean. She wouldn't just. She would, Casey cut in, suddenly grim. Especially if she had help. Tyler's phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "Jenna, did you sell the house?" He stared at the message. Inside, Helen received her own. "Jenna, did you sell the house?" Helen replied with only 3 words. "Helen, ask your father." Casey caught the look on his face. "What?" Tyler showed her the message. "She's messing with you," Casey said, but her voice faltered. He looked back at the house. "No," he said. "She's done messing." That was the goodbye. From across the street, the curtain in Dolores's front window moved slightly, watching. Back inside, Helen opened the side drawer of the credenza. Inside, one manila folder. She slid out the documents and placed them face up on the table, lining the edges just so. Title transfer. Signed. Power of attorney. Filed. Closing disclosure. Prepared. The house was no longer hers, and it was never going to be theirs. Back outside, Tyler kicked the porch rail once lightly. Not enough to break it. Just enough to feel something move under his foot. Casey looked at him. "What now?" He shook his head, jaw clenched. "We go home. But this isn't over." As they turned to leave, Jenna sat in her car at the end of the block, engine off, phone in hand. She hadn't meant to follow them, but she had. She watched them walk back to the car, arguing in gestures, lips tight. Her father looked confused. Casey looked furious. Jenna tapped her notes app and wrote just one line. They didn't know. Then, she locked her phone and drove straight to her grandmother's house. The smell of rosemary chicken wafted through the house, masking the tension as well as Casey hoped it might. She'd even lit 2 tapered candles on the sideboard, never mind that it was Tuesday, and the dining room was usually reserved for tax season and passive-aggressive holidays. Helen sat at the end of the table, her posture perfect, her linen napkin unfolded but untouched. She glanced at her plat chicken breast, roasted carrots, and something attempting risotto but made no move to eat. "Mom," Tyler began, "we're really glad you came tonight. It's overdue." Helen nodded once. It is." Jenna sat diagonally across from her grandmother, pushing peas around her plate like she was counting them. Casey caught the lack of conversation and jumped in with her favorite fallback, charm layered in implication. "So, we've been talking," she said, offering Helen a practiced smile. "With the real estate market the way it is, there's a lot of potential in that house of yours." Helen blinked slowly. "You mean the one I no longer live in?" "Exactly," Casey said brightly. "There's so much we could do with it. Tyler has the Airbnb permit paperwork already drafted. We'd renovate the kitchen, of course. Those old cabinets super charming, but they're falling apart. Tyler reached for his wine glass, nodding like a man with vision. Helen tilted her head. You'd renovate the kitchen of a house you don't own? Tyler forced a laugh. Well, not yet, but we're assuming. Did you want to buy it from me? Helen asked, her tone so even it knocked the air out of the room for a second. Casey's smile tightened, teeth still showing but eyes harder now. It's not for sale. Not to anyone but us. Helen picked up her wine, held it to the light. Merlot, slightly too warm. She took a slow sip. That ship's already sailed, she said. Jenna's fork froze midair. Tyler put his glass down too hard. What's that supposed to mean? Helen set her wine down. It means you've been making plans around something that was never yours to assume. Casey's voice dropped a notch. You said you weren't selling. No, Helen replied. I said I wasn't living there anymore. You never asked the right question. The air tightened. Jenna stood up suddenly. Excuse me, she said, barely above a whisper, and walked out of the room without waiting for a response. The sound of her bedroom door closing soft, not slammed, landed heavier than anything spoken. Tyler leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp now. You're really going to do this? After everything? Helen didn't answer. She reached for her water glass this time, took a slow drink, and met his gaze with cool indifference. Casey folded her napkin with forced precision. You're being cruel. No? Helen said calmly. I'm being careful. There's a difference. The clink of silverware was the only sound for a long beat. From down the hallway, a low hum of music played through Jenna's door. A song Helen had played once in the car on the way to Jenna's piano recital years ago. A small echo from a quieter time. Tyler stood. We invited you here to talk. We were trying to... No, Helen cut in. You invited me to dinner so you could pitch me a plan to benefit yourselves. You didn't ask how I was. You didn't ask what I planned. You offered me chicken and assumption. Casey stood too. You're bitter. Helen rose from her chair with unhurried grace. I'm aware. Without another word, she reached for her handbag, walked to the front door, and let herself out. The silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was loaded. Back in her room, Jenna picked up her phone and typed a message. Jenna, you okay? Helen's reply came quickly. Helen, I've never been clearer. Then, Helen, tomorrow, I'll tell you everything. Jenna stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the old family group chat and created a new one. Just one member, Grandma. The file cabinet groaned as Helen pulled open the bottom drawer, the one with the hidden latch you had to press with the spoon handle, not a finger. A trick her husband taught her back when they still trusted locks more than lawyers. Dust puffed up as she reached inside. Folders lined up like soldiers, all labeled in her late husband's clean block lettering. Taxes, mortgages, maintenance logs, but one stood out thicker paper, yellowed at the edges. On the front, written in pen, to Helen if they try anything. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply brought the envelope to the dining table, set it down, and stared at it for one long beat. Then she opened it. Inside, a notarized, durable power of attorney naming Helen sole controller of the estate. Title paperwork for the house, already transferred into a private holding trust. A letter in her husband's familiar scrawl. No greeting, no goodbye, just this. They'll show you exactly who they are, eventually. Let them. Use this when they stop pretending. Helen read the sentence twice. Then she folded the letter and tucked it back inside. The next morning, she arrived at Ben Carter's office precisely at 9 a.m. a time, chosen not for symbolism, but for efficiency. Ben looked up from his desk, removing his glasses. Helen Roth, I was wondering when you'd walk in with that folder. She handed it over without a word. He scanned the documents. One brow arched. You two were smart. I didn't even know this trust was fully activated. Neither did they, Helen said. Ben flipped to the POA form. This signature is solid. Witnessed, sealed, filed, yep, all binding. She leaned back slightly in the chair. I need it all airtight. It already is, Ben replied. But I'll triple staple it for dramatic effect. Helen offered the faintest of smiles. When she stepped back into the Charleston heat, Dolores was waiting on the courthouse bench across the street, an iced coffee in each hand and a paperback mystery balanced on her lap. I figured you'd come out with proof or with fire, Dolores said, handing her a drink. Or both. Proof, Helen said. The fire's next. Dolores patted the bench beside her. You've got your documents. Now let them make the first big mistake. Helen didn't sit. They already did. They assumed I wouldn't open a drawer. Later that afternoon, back in the quiet of her rental cottage, Helen stood in the small bedroom she'd turned into her office. The sun caught the top of the mahogany file cabinet as she laid the new documents into place labeled, cross-checked, notarized. But one document didn't go back into the cabinet. Instead, she pulled out a slim, fireproof folder from the closet and slid in a new title page. Legacy Trust, Roth Family, Primary Beneficiary, Jenna Roth. Then, like it was nothing more than paying a bill, she moved the rest, her savings account, her certificates of deposit, her stock small but steady, her late husband's military pension disbursements, all of it rerouted to the Legacy Trust under her direct management, with a provision for transfer upon death or medical incapacitation. No loopholes, no shared access, no surprises. Jenna would be notified in writing, but not yet. Not until the water ran clearer. The printer spat out the confirmation page with a soft mechanical sigh. Helen looked at it, looked at the clock. 4:42 p.m. Still daylight, still time. She texted Ben, "Let me know when the trust paperwork is fully uploaded." Then Miss Radner, "Thank you for moving up the escrow." Then she paused, phone in hand, and texted Jenna, "Come by tomorrow. There's something I want you to see." Across town, Tyler and Casey were on their patio, sipping wine they couldn't afford, scrolling listings of houses they wouldn't inherit. Back in her office, Helen opened the drawer one last time and laid her husband's letter flat beneath the folder. Let them try, it seemed to whisper, and let them find out. The Charleston County Courthouse was built to look permanent columns, marble, everything designed to outlast emotion. But that morning, as Helen walked through the front doors in a navy sheath dress and a steel-set jaw, she didn't feel intimidated. She felt finished. Ben Carter met her just inside security, carrying a leather briefcase and a copy of the same manila folder she'd handed him days ago. "They're already inside," he said. Helen adjusted her gloves. Then they've had time to dig their own hole. Inside the probate courtroom, Tyler sat at the petitioner's table, suit pressed, lips tight. Casey was beside him, dressed in strategic beige, flipping through a binder like it held scripture. The court clerk called for quiet, and the judge, an older woman with a reputation for zero tolerance toward weaponized family, drama took her seat. "Petitioner seeks temporary executor authority," the judge began, "on the basis of alleged instability in the current estate holder, Helen Roth." Helen didn't look at Tyler. She looked at the empty bench 2 rows behind her where Jenna had promised she'd sit. Late school final, she'd said, but she'd try. Ben stood. "Your Honor, before we begin, I've submitted Exhibits A through G 10 years of tax filings, mortgage payments, portfolio activity, and estate maintenance, all executed solely by Mrs. Roth." The judge flipped through the folder in front of her, frowning at the paperwork. Impressive consistency. Tyler leaned forward. "That doesn't mean she's capable now." Ben didn't flinch. "Which is why we also submitted a recent medical evaluation from Dr. Elaine Morrissey, geriatric psychiatry. Her statement reads, cognitively intact, financially literate, no impairments observed." The judge nodded. "I have it." Casey stood, voice soft, as if she were mourning a relationship that never existed. "We've just noticed changes, confusion, repetition. She's been making erratic decisions." Ben turned slowly. "Would you like the court to enter Exhibit H?" Casey blinked. "Which is?" Ben raised a printed copy of an her email. "A message from Mrs. Casey Roth to her husband dated 3 weeks ago. If she doesn't sign soon, we'll have to force it. She's stalling again." Casey's mouth opened, then closed. The judge arched a brow. "Mrs. Roth, are you aware that misrepresenting capacity under oath carries legal consequences?" Casey didn't answer. Helen sat motionless, hands folded in her lap. "Petition denied this time," the judge said. "Court finds insufficient evidence of incapacity. Further, it finds the request to be speculative, unsupported by medical or legal precedent, and, at minimum, poorly timed." She paused. "At worst, frivolous." Tyler stood abruptly. So, that's it? The judge's voice cut like piano wire. You may refile if material conditions change, but until then, Mrs. Roth retains full authority. Helen finally turned her gaze to her son, measured, quiet, unyielding. As the courtroom emptied, Casey hissed, "She made you look like a fool." Tyler didn't answer. His jaw worked, but no words came. Helen walked past them without pause, Ben just behind her. When they stepped onto the courthouse steps, Helen pulled out her phone and typed a single message to Miss Radner. "Move the closing up." Ben adjusted his tie. "Public record now. Anyone who pulls court transcripts will know you defended your capacity and won." "I didn't win," Helen said. "I just exposed what they were willing to gamble." From across the parking lot, a familiar shape hurried up the walkway, Jenna, winded and flushed from running. "I missed it, didn't I?" she asked, panting slightly. Helen smiled. "Only the part where the wolves tried on sheep's clothing." Jenna exhaled. "So what happens now?" Helen opened her purse, pulled out a peppermint, and handed it to her granddaughter like a peace offering. "Now," she said, "we start the real countdown." Above them, the courthouse flag flapped in a breeze that carried no warning but change was coming. And inside Tyler's inbox, a new email sat unread. Subject: Notification of escrow acceleration. Radner Realty. Helen had beaten them to the next move, and they didn't even know the clock had already started ticking. The envelope came 2 days late and looked like it had been stuffed in a coat pocket, forgotten, then remembered with guilt. Pale lavender, creased at the corners. Helen turned it over twice in her hands before opening it. Inside, a mass-printed birthday card with gold foil balloons and a scripted message that read, "Wishing you a day full of love and joy." No handwriting, not a single word added. Just a void of ink where a sentiment should have lived. A folded check was tucked inside. Helen unfolded it slowly. Made out to Helen Roth. Amount: $250. Signature line: blank. She stared at it for a long moment, then folded the card shut with one decisive motion and set both items into the shredder tray beneath her desk. The machine didn't even hesitate. The teeth of paper and intention ground it down to ribbons. By late afternoon, the cottage smelled of cinnamon and browned butter. Jenna stood barefoot in Helen's kitchen, icing a homemade applesauce cake with cream cheese frosting and just enough nutmeg. She'd insisted on baking it from scratch. Store-bought doesn't say thank you right. Helen leaned on the counter, watching her granddaughter's movements. Jenna worked with surprising, precision-measured, unhurried, already picking up the tempo of the woman who raised her. "I've never made this one before," Jenna said, smoothing the final swirl. "It was your grandfather's favorite," Helen replied. "He always asked for it with a bourbon glaze. I told him it was excessive. He told me I was stubborn. Was he right?" Helen gave her a half-smile. "Of course, but I made the glaze anyway." Jenna turned off the mixer. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." Jenna hesitated. "How do you know when to stop giving people more chances?" Helen didn't rush to answer. Instead, she reached for a black binder on the nearby shelf. It was labeled Ledgers 2014, 2021. She opened to a bookmarked page and set it on the table. "You read the numbers," she said, "and when they stop adding up, you close the book." Jenna sat beside her. Helen guided her finger across columns, deposits, transfers, recurring deductions. "This is how you track a household," Helen said. "And this is how you track intention." Jenna looked up. "He took from you for years." Helen didn't blink. "Because I let him. Until I didn't." Upstairs, Helen's phone pinged on the charger. Jenna fetched it down. The notification glowed. Facebook. Casey Roth posted a status. Helen never checked Facebook, but Jenna did. She opened the app. Casey's status read, "Some people forget who raised them. Some people forget who matters." It had 3 likes, 2 from cousins they never invited to anything, 1 from someone who probably thought it was about her dog. Jenna rolled her eyes and passed the phone to Helen without saying anything. Helen stared for a moment, then handed it back. "Reply," she said. "Anonymously." Jenna's eyebrow lifted. "You sure?" Helen nodded once. "Your Aunt Dolores has a burner account. Use that." Moments later, Dolores's anonymous profile Tea with Teeth posted a single line beneath Casey's cryptic martyrdom. Some people forget who paid their mortgage. It received 6 likes in 5 minutes. Dolores texted Helen an emoji of a champagne bottle. They both smiled. Later that night, as the cake cooled and the binder of ledgers remained open on the dining table, Jenna stood by the window, watching the breeze sway the porch light. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why are you letting me in on all this now?" Helen poured 2 mugs of tea. "No honey, just lemon." "Because you asked the right questions," she said. "And because I see who you're becoming." Jenna turned from the window. "Who's that?" Helen placed the mug beside her. "Someone who won't let history repeat," she said. The next morning, Tyler would call twice, once from his cell, once from a blocked number. Helen wouldn't pick up. The ledger would stay open, and Casey's next status would never get a reply. The Charleston Municipal Clerk's office smelled like old laminate and bureaucracy, half lemons, half toner. Helen stood at the counter, her folder clutched under one arm, her voice calm but edged in flint. "I'm here to report a fraudulent executor petition," she said. The clerk blinked, shuffled papers. "And you have documentation?" Helen slid over a printed copy of Tyler's emergency filing, the same one already struck down in court. But this version included 2 key updates: a forged supporting statement he'd slipped into a separate filing system, and a cover sheet with a signature he'd clearly traced. The clerk leaned in. "Do you have power of attorney?" Helen produced it like a badge. Notarized, clean, final. "I do. And I know where the bodies are, buried paper ones at least." By the time she left, the application was officially flagged. The fraud alert went into the county record. It was 10:14 a.m. At 10:17, Helen's phone buzzed. "Miss Radner." Escrow confirmed. "Closing set for Friday, 9:30 a.m. Helen didn't reply. She simply looked up at the clear sky, then back down at the list she kept folded in her purse. 1 item left to cross off today. Back at the cottage, she placed the file folder on the dining table and turned on the shredder. One by one, she fed it everything Tyler once had access to: joint insurance papers, old co-signature loan documents, shared banking agreements for convenience, copies of duplicate keys. Gone. The machine purred like a satisfied cat. Helen watched each page vanish into ribbons of past trust. Then her phone lit up. "Jenna." "Grandma, I just caught Casey in your room. Drawers open. She said she was looking for a charger, but she didn't even have her phone." Helen exhaled, not in surprise, but in confirmation. "Helen, thank you. Come by after class." She walked to the front closet, pulled down a box labeled "Winter Coats," and opened the false bottom. Inside, a brand new home security kit still in shrink wrap. An hour later, every door had a fresh sensor, every window a camera. The alarm code was hers alone. The lock on the filing cabinet changed next. That afternoon, while stirring a pot of gumbo on the stove, her phone buzzed again. "Tyler, you're making things difficult." Helen let the message sit for a moment, then typed, "You haven't seen difficult," and hit send. Upstairs, she removed every old password sheet and backup flash drive from the drawer in the guest room. She loaded them into a lockbox and slid it beneath her bed. Helen didn't pace. She moved with the calm of someone who'd stopped hoping for honesty and started building a fortress instead. Outside, Dolores pulled up in her Ford, stepping out with a basket of rosemary and soup bones. "You look like someone who just deleted a man from the utilities," she said, handing over the basket. Helen smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." Dolores glanced around. "You armed the cottage?" Helen nodded, digitally and emotionally. They sat on the porch with sweet tea as the sun angled low over the hydrangeas. Helen opened the folder one last time to check the final documents. Everything was ready. The closing would be clean. The assets already shifted. "You ever think about telling him?" Dolores asked. Helen took a sip of tea. "What's the point of telling someone what they refuse to hear?" Across town, Casey stood in the guest room of her own home, staring at her reflection, trying to rehearse charm, reframe manipulation, disguise intent. And Jenna sat in the back of a Charleston public bus, staring at the text thread between her parents. A line stood out, highlighted in her memory from days ago. "Casey, If she doesn't sign soon, we'll have to force it. She screenshotted it again, just in case. Back at the cottage, Helen poured the shredded paper into the compost bin with the eggshells and lemon rinds. Tyler thought she was difficult. He hadn't seen what she could grow from scraps. The sun rose hot and early over Charleston, casting long shadows across Helen's front porch. The hydrangeas were still beaded with dew when the black Mercedes eased into the driveway bold, as brass and just as cold. Tyler stepped out in a blazer too crisp for the weather, holding his phone like a compass, already filming. Casey emerged on the passenger side in cream linen and oversized sunglasses. A man with a Nikon slung around his neck followed them, his sneakers squeaking on the brick walk. Casey fluffed her hair. Just a few quick shots, the before photos, light staging. Tyler didn't knock. He just reached for the doorknob. Click. Locked. The deadbolt gleamed, new and impersonal. Then the door opened slowly. Helen stood in the frame, dressed in slate blue and composed like a verdict. "It's no longer mine," she said evenly. "Or yours." Tyler blinked. "What?" A slow rumble drew his attention to the street. Down the block, a moving truck rolled in, bright and unmistakable. The logo read Low Country Hauling, and the liftgate was already down. Two men in matching shirts stepped out and began unloading boxes neatly labeled color-coded, furniture wrapped in thick pads, a baby swing, a small upright piano. From the sidewalk, a couple appeared mid-30s, well-dressed but modest. She carried a diaper bag slung across her chest. He held a baby carrier. They walked with purpose. "Excuse me," the man said, stopping at the base of the steps. "We're the Murphys. We close today?" Helen stepped aside and handed him a white envelope. "Keys. Garage opener. Security codes inside." The woman smiled, tired and sincere. "Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means." "I do," Helen replied with a glance at the child tucked into the carrier. "More than you know." Tyler watched in stunned silence as the couple climbed the porch and passed him without a flicker of recognition. The photographer lowered his camera, suddenly unsure of the assignment. Casey stepped back, voice tight. "You sold it?" "To someone who needed it," Helen said, without looking at her. "You can't just—" Tyler started, but his voice faltered. Helen faced him fully. "Actually, I can. And I did. Escrow closed this morning." He laughed, brittle and humorless. "You did this out of spite?" "No," she said. "Out of strategy." Behind them, the movers began bringing in a crib. A soft lullaby toy chimed as it swung from a box. The front door swung shut behind the Murphys with a satisfying click. Casey reached for her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "Calling your lawyer?" Helen asked. "Tell him to read the county filings first." Across the street, Dolores sat on her porch, legs crossed, a glass teacup in hand. She raised it like a salute and sipped slowly, eyes gleaming behind tortoise-shell frames. Tyler opened his mouth again, then closed it. Casey turned to the photographer. "Delete everything. We're done." He hesitated. "You still want the porch shots?" Casey's glare answered for her. The photographer stepped back toward his car, mumbling about miscommunications and refunds. Helen walked down the steps, calm and deliberate. She passed Tyler and Casey without pause. "You had a vision board," she said over her shoulder. "I had paperwork." They turned to watch her cross the lawn toward Dolores's porch. A breeze lifted the edge of Helen's blouse as she climbed the steps, and Dolores handed her the tea without needing to ask. "They brought a photographer?" Dolores asked. "They thought it was a coronation," Helen said, sipping. "Turned out to be an eviction." A screech of tires announced the Mercedes backing too quickly out of the driveway. Inside the house, the Murphys opened windows. Outside, the world turned. Helen sat back, her fingers wrapped around the warm porcelain cup. Across town, Jenna's phone buzzed. A photo from Helen. The Murphys on the porch. Captioned, "Legacy transferred. Quietly. Permanently." Jenna smiled, saved the photo, then texted back. "Next move?" Helen didn't reply immediately. She just watched the Murphys hang a wreath on the door. A small wooden sign underneath it read, "This house is not for sale." And on Dolores's porch, two women sat in quiet satisfaction, the kind that only comes after reclaiming what was never freely given. The pen clicked once, Then again, as Ben Carter skimmed the last page of paperwork under the lamplight of his office. The oak desk between them still carried the faint smell of lemon polish and long-settled dust. Helen sat with her back straight, arms folded loosely, her purse resting neatly on the floor beside her. "Well," Ben said, exhaling. "It's done. Sale cleared. Funds secured. Paper trail ironclad. Tyler can rant all he wants, but the courts won't touch this." Helen didn't blink. "Good. Let them run out of breath before they run out of options." Ben leaned back, tapping the file closed with 2 fingers. "You want to deliver the news, or should I?" Helen smiled tight and patient. "I already have." The next morning, Jenna stepped into her grandmother's cottage and froze. Spread across the dining table like a secret finally told were 7 neatly stacked files and 1 thick envelope with her name on it in Helen's handwriting. Helen poured her tea. "It's time." Jenna glanced between the papers and her grandmother. Hesitant. "Time for what?" "For you to know what comes next." She opened the envelope. The living trust document sat on top, crisp and legal. Jenna scanned the first few paragraphs, then blinked twice. "Wait, this says I'm the beneficiary?" "It does." "All of it?" "Yes." Jenna sank slowly into a chair. "I thought you were just protecting it." "I was," Helen said. "But protection means planning beyond presence, and planning means naming a successor who's earned the right to be trusted." Jenna looked up, visibly shaken. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything yet." Helen sat beside her. "Just listen. And remember, what's handed down can be legacy or burden. The difference is in how you carry it." From the corner of the room, Dolores emerged with a small, wrapped bundle in her hands. "This is for you," she said, placing it in front of Jenna. Jenna unwrapped the cloth to reveal a leather-bound journal, the initials JR etched softly into the bottom corner. Dolores smiled. "Write your own legacy. Don't just inherit ours." Across town, Tyler's phone pinged while he was halfway through a bland tuna sandwich. He picked it up lazy until he saw the subject line. "Notice of Beneficiary Transfer Roth Family Living Trust." He read it twice. Then, a third time, Casey walked in with 2 shopping bags and an annoyed look. "They didn't have your size in navy." "Just charcoal." "She gave it to Jenna," Tyler said, barely above a whisper. "What?" "She gave all of it to Jenna. The house proceeds. The estate. The damn legacy trust." Casey dropped the bags, lip curling. "You've got to be kidding me." Tyler stood so fast his chair scraped across the hardwood. He paced, fists clenched, mind spinning. "You said the paperwork wouldn't hold up." "It shouldn't have," Casey shouted. "She moved too fast. That lawyer Benny must have insulated it from contesting." Tyler's phone buzzed again. A new message. "Jenna, I know what you tried to take. You never earned a cent. Grandma did." He read it aloud, hands shaking. Casey snatched the phone. "She's turning on us?" "No," Tyler growled. "She's already gone." Back at the cottage, Jenna closed the folder and looked up. Her face was pale but steady, her voice softer now. "Do you think they'll come after me for this?" Helen sipped her tea. "They'll come for what they think belongs to them. But you don't need to defend what's already law. I just don't want it to break us apart." Helen looked out the window. The wind tugged at the flag above Dolores's porch. "Some things aren't breaking," she said. "They're revealing." That evening, Jenna posted a photo on her private account, just the edge of the journal, a teacup, and the caption, "Inheritance is earned. I know who earned mine." Casey saw it. Tyler read it 5 times. And Helen? Helen watched the porch light flicker on as Jenna stepped outside to sit beside her. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Legacy had chosen its heir. And the storm brewing now wasn't on Helen's shoulders anymore. It started with a ping, then another, then 6 more. Helen woke at 5:42 a.m. to the glow of her phone lighting the bedside table in harsh pulses. She slipped on her glasses and tapped the screen. The first message was from Tyler. "You manipulated her. This isn't what Dad wanted." Followed by another. "You're not thinking clearly. This isn't the mother I knew." And another, time-stamped 2:13 a.m. "We'll fix this, before the courts do." Helen stared at the screen, then opened her voicemail. Casey's voice, clipped and saccharine. Helen, we're just trying to understand why you'd sabotage your family. You're clearly overwhelmed. Jenna's young. She doesn't see it yet. But people are watching. You're isolating. Erratic. It's concerning. Helen deleted the message without saving it. By 7 a.m., the inbox held 19 unread message sheets, one louder than the last. The tone shifted from coaxing to coercive. From, "we love you," to, "you need help." By the 20th message, Tyler had used the word unstable 4 times. At 7:45, Helen made tea. By 7:50, she blocked Tyler's number. By 7:52, Casey's WWWW. Jenna showed up at 8:10 a.m., bleary-eyed but alert. She held her phone like evidence. "I saw everything," she said. "Dad keyed me on half of it. He thought I'd talk you down." Helen gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit. We're going to talk about firewalls." "I already saved everything," Jenna said, flipping her phone around. "Screenshots, voicemail recordings, timestamps. I started a folder called In Case They Escalate." Helen raised an eyebrow. "You titled it?" "I color-coded it." Dolores entered the room without knocking, holding 2 paper bags and a small flash drive between her fingers like a grenade pin. "Good morning. Brought pastries and encryption software." Jenna blinked. "You have encryption software?" Dolores handed her the flash drive. "Passwords pineapple. No one ever guesses pineapple." Helen smiled faintly. "You really are a menace." "From the old school of subtle warfare," Dolores replied, unpacking croissants. "Let's teach her how to protect herself from digital slime." By 9:30, Dolores was walking Jenna through secure folder creation and metadata scrubs. Helen stood near the window, watching the morning shift outside the mail truck, a neighbor walking her dog, the hum of a lawnmower down the street. Peace had become something they had to reinforce, not expect. Jenna leaned over her laptop. "They keep trying to frame this as elder decline, like, just because you're quiet, you're confused." Helen turned. "When men fall silent, they're considered wise. When women do, we're considered lost." Ben Carter's voice buzzed in just before noon. "Checked in with probate court. We're seeing activity on their end, mostly noise. Nothing formal yet. In the meantime, I filed a protective clause on the trust. You now have a legal buffer against predatory claims." Helen texted back. "Thank you. Anticipated as much." Then she turned to Jenna. "Ben's locked it down. From here forward, no one touches anything without leaving a fingerprint." Jenna nodded slowly. "We should keep documenting. Like every call, every tone shift, a timeline." Dolores raised her teacup. "Look at her. She's going full archive mode." Helen sipped from her own. "She gets it from me." Jenna smiled, but her eyes still held a trace of something sharper, betrayal not fully processed. "They'll turn it up, won't they?" she asked. "The manipulation." Helen leaned in. "People don't escalate when they're in control. They escalate when they realize they've lost it." Outside, the breeze picked up again, hot and restless, the kind Charleston knew well. A stormy hush before the real weather changed. Helen reached across the table and tapped Jenna's folder. "Keep backing it all up. Every message, every implication. One day, if you ever need to, this becomes your firewall." Jenna nodded and clicked upload. Upstairs, Helen's phone lit up again, another unknown number. She let it ring, then blocked it, then turned the phone face down, and opened her planner to Friday. Underlined twice, final account closure. They weren't just protecting the legacy now. They were documenting its defense. The waiting room smelled like eucalyptus and soft plastica calming lye, like most things designed to settle the nerves of people about to be dissected. Helen sat in the far left chair, hands folded in her lap, a manila folder resting like armor atop her purse. She wore slate gray, hair pinned in its usual no-nonsense twist, and flats with just enough arch to carry weight. Across from her sat Dr. Marcus Elkin, court-appointed psychologist, tapping a pen lightly against his clipboard. He was in his mid-50s, balding at the crown, eyes sharp with caution. His posture was relaxed, his questions were not. "Can you describe for me the events of the last 3 months from your perspective, starting with the funeral?" Helen met his gaze. "My husband died. My son tried to take what wasn't his," I responded. Elkin raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He made a note. "And do you feel—" "No." Helen said flatly. That's not how I answer. You ask. I'll decide if it's worth feeling anything about. He paused, then smiled faintly. Noted. They moved through memory tests. Short-term recall, number sequencing, emotional reasoning scenarios. Helen answered everything without pause. Her cadence even. Her tone dry but alert. When he asked her to interpret a drawing of a complex family tree, she traced the relationships in silence, then said, "This isn't about memory. It's about loyalty. He thinks blood entitles him to things character never earned." Another note. An hour later, she stepped outside into the Charleston heat, sunlight catching in the silver edges of her hair. Her phone buzzed. One new message from Ben. Judge has Tyler's latest petition. You'll want to be there when they read this evaluation out loud. Helen smiled, just a little, then walked 2 blocks to the courthouse, unhurried and unbothered. The courtroom was half full when she entered. Tyler was already seated, flanked by Casey and a lawyer Helen didn't recognize, young, smug, and overly cologned. Jenna sat behind Helen in the gallery, flanked by Dolores, both sipping iced lattes like it was opening night at a Broadway revival. The judge called the session to order and lifted the file from the clerk's desk. This is in regard to petitioner's motion to reassess Helen Roth's mental competency under suspicion of cognitive decline and undue influence. Helen didn't flinch. The judge continued, reading directly from Dr. Elkin's report. Quote, "Subject is precise, lucid, and intentional in all responses. Demonstrates high-level executive function, financial awareness, and emotional regulation. Exhibits no signs of impairment. Recommendation. Full competency. Affirmed." Tyler stood abruptly. "Your Honor, he only saw her once. That's not enough to—" The judge didn't even look up. "Dr. Elkin is certified by this court, and unlike you, Mr. Roth, he is not incentivized by inheritance." Tyler sat back down. Ben stood with a slight rustle of his papers. "We'd also like to enter Exhibit L, a notarized affidavit from Mr. Charles Roth, dated 2 years prior to his death, stating," he held the paper up, "all final decisions regarding this estate are to be made by Helen Roth. No exceptions, no appeals." He handed it to the clerk. The judge read it silently, then nodded. Motion denied. And because this is the petitioner's 3rd attempt to challenge an already settled estate, the court dismisses this case with prejudice. Any further filing without new, material evidence will be considered harassment and sanctioned accordingly. Casey's head dropped. Tyler looked like he'd swallowed acid. The bailiff gave Helen a brief nod as he moved to escort the parties out. Helen didn't move. She waited, let it sink, then walked out the side exit with Jenna, their shoulders aligned like bookend zone chapter closed, another just beginning. That night, Helen found a small white envelope in her mailbox. No return address, just her name in block letters. Inside, a card with an embossed gold scale on the front. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakable. Radnor, R.E. Justice served. Breakfast soon? Helen chuckled, tucked the card into her ledger folder, and wrote beneath it in pen, "Confirmed, on all counts." Then she poured herself a glass of wine and opened the porch door. The sky was dark, but clear, and no one, absolutely no one, was calling anymore. The earth behind Helen's rental cottage was stubborn clay with patches of loam, reluctant to give way to the spade. But she dug with quiet insistence, each plunge of the shovel carving out the past. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and gloves that had seen 3 decades of spring, the knees of her jeans damp with sweat and soil. Beside her, Jenna crouched low with a hand rake, working the edges of the trench. "You sure about roses?" Jenna asked, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. "They're a little dramatic." Helen smiled. "Good. They'll fit in here just fine." Jenna laughed, soft and breathy. "It smells like, I don't know, fresh starts?" Helen nodded toward the trellis post waiting nearby. "That's exactly what it is." They worked in tandem, Jenna handing her grandmother the potted bush while Helen set it deep into the dirt. The rose was ivory with a faint pink edge, elegant, restrained. The tag read, "Legacy." "I picked that one on purpose," Jenna said. Helen patted the soil around the base. "So did I." A small wooden sign leaned against the porch column, still drying in the sun. Jenna had painted it herself in a dark green hand. "Not for sale." Dolores arrived an hour later, with a foil-wrapped pie in one hand and a chilled bottle of wine in the other. She didn't ask permission, just walked through the back gate and whistled low at the garden in progress. "You two look like a Hallmark movie with better dialogue," she said, handing the pie off. "It's rhubarb," she added. "Sharp and sweet, like you two." Helen stood, brushing dirt from her pants. "Help yourself to a seat. Jenna, grab the glasses." By late afternoon, the pie was half gone, the bottle fully empty, and laughter floated off the porch like smoke from a controlled burn. A healing kind, the kind that leaves something stronger behind. Ben called just after sunset. Helen stepped inside to take it, leaving the screen door slightly ajar. Jenna could hear only her half of the conversation. Yes, she knows. No changes. Irrevocable? Good. I don't want wiggle room. Yes, filed. Thank you, Ben. She returned with a small smile and a folded document in hand. What was that? Jenna asked. Helen handed it over. Confirmation. The new estate structure is final. Full transfer of rights to you. 0 contingencies. 0 reversions. Jenna unfolded the paper, eyes scanning it with a weight that was half joy, half gravity. Why now? She whispered. Why give me everything? Helen leaned on the porch rail. Because I've already lived my portion. It's your turn. But this time, the garden starts clean. Down the street, a gray sedan idled for a moment before pulling into a mailbox turnoff. The process server stepped out in khakis and sunglasses, walked briskly up a driveway lined with unwatered shrubs, and rang the bell. Casey opened the door, startled. Delivery for Mr. Roth, the server said. Legal notice. Please confirm receipt. Tyler appeared behind her, barefoot, eyes shadowed. He took the envelope, tore it open. His face changed by the second. You are not a beneficiary, the top line read. You have no legal claim to the estate or trust of Helen Roth. Any further contact regarding inheritance will be considered harassment and referred to counsel. Casey read over his shoulder. Her jaw tightened. She's cutting you out completely. No, Tyler said, low and hollow. She already did. Back at the cottage, Helen and Jenna stood at the edge of the rose beds, the light now soft amber. The first bloom had begun to open. Jenna tucked the not for sale sign into the dirt beside the walkway. It wobbled slightly, then held firm. Feels real now, she said. It is, Helen replied. For the first time. From her rocking chair, Dolores raised her empty wineglass like a toast. May everything unwelcome stay exactly where it belongs, she said. Outside the gate, the wind rustled the roses, and somewhere across town, a door slammed, but no one bothered to look back. The notification came in quietly, as most endings do. A soft ping from Helen's tablet as she stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out her morning mug. The subject line read, Roth Family Living Trust, Clause 17B, activation confirmed. Helen dried her hands, sat down at the table, and opened the file. One signature from her, one timestamp. And with that, the legacy clause went live. Jenna was now the full successor trustee, medical power of attorney, and irrevocable sole heir. No caveats, no loopholes, no family meetings required. Outside, the roses leaned in the breeze. Across the kitchen, Jenna looked up from her laptop. Is it done? Helen nodded once. It is. Jenna exhaled. I didn't expect it to feel too light. It feels like exhaling for the first time in months. That's what happens when weight is handed off instead of dropped, Helen said. You carry it differently. The next voicemail came from Casey. Her voice was tight, rehearsed, weaponized politeness sharpened at the edges. I just want to remind you, Helen, that if you continue spreading these versions of things, there will be consequences. There are reputations involved, careers. I'd really hate to have to involve outside parties in something that could have stayed private. Helen didn't reply, didn't even delete it. She archived the file, tagged it defamation implied, and forwarded it straight to Ben's secure inbox. By noon, a certified letter had been sent boilerplate but firm. All future communications regarding personal or estate matters must go through legal representation. Any attempts at coercion, defamation, or reputational interference will be documented and litigated as necessary. No contact, no escalation, just silence wearing a well-cut suit. Dolores arrived with a thermos of sweet tea and a new paperback tucked under her arm. She sat on the porch with Helen, the two of them watching the breeze shift through the hanging fern baskets. "They're unraveling," Dolores said softly. "You didn't erase them. You just finally saw clearly." Helen didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "I kept hoping they'd come back to themselves. I just didn't realize that was themselves." Dolores poured the tea. "Takes a while to accept that sometimes loyalty is just prolonged disbelief." Later that afternoon, an email landed from Radnor Realty's finance department. Final disbursement from home sale completed. Amount: $264,000.21. Transferred to Roth Living Trust Final Reserve Account. Helen stared at the number. Not massive, but clean, undisputed, fully hers. Then she logged into a second account, one no one else knew about, and made a transfer, half the amount. Recipient: Low Country Shelter Fund. Memo line: "In memory of Charles and in spite of bloodlines." Transaction confirmed. Anonymous donor noted. She logged out and closed the lid of the laptop. Across town, Tyler stood in the middle of his kitchen, the counter littered with unopened mail. His phone buzzed with another bounced payment alert. The mortgage on their second property was now officially behind. Casey paced behind him, rereading the denial letter from the private lender they'd tried to court. "You told me this was temporary," she hissed. Tyler didn't respond. Tyler? Still nothing. On the floor beside him, a thick envelope lay crumpled. Inside, copies of the court's dismissal, a full estate freeze against his name, and a permanent block from reapplying for executor rights. Helen hadn't just shut the door. She had welded it shut. Back at the cottage, the sun was lowering over the fence line. Helen stepped outside to find Jenna tending the newest rosebush. She was humming something, a song Helen recognized from her mother's humming decades ago. Something full of small hope. "I've been thinking," Jenna said without turning. "Next semester, I want to take estate law as an elective. Learn how all this actually works." Helen smiled. "Good. Learn the rules, then learn how to outthink them." A hawk circled high above the tresselant, sure. Inside, Helen opened her planner one last time that day. Under Friday, she drew a single check mark. No more estate business. No more filings. Just peace. And across town, as another overdraft ping hit Tyler's inbox, Helen opened a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of a new page, "Let the silence hold." But she already knew it wouldn't stay silent for long. The wall above the mantel was finally bare, waiting. Helen stood on the step stool in her cottage's living room, steadying the last nail with the heel of her palm. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet where the breeze outside seemed to listen. She reached into a padded envelope and withdrew the photo. Charles in uniform, caught mid-laugh on their first 4th of July in Charleston, his hand shielding his eyes from the sun, his grin crooked. It wasn't the most flattering shot, but it was the one Helen loved, most tune-edited, unposed, true. She centered the frame, stepped back, and nodded once. "About time," she whispered. Behind her, the door creaked open. Jenna stepped in carrying a wide, flat box, her eyes darting to the photo on the wall. "Looks perfect," she said. Helen didn't respond, just smiled and climbed down. Jenna set the box on the dining table. "I made something. It's not fancy, but it's us." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Us?" Jenna lifted the lid. Inside sat a hand-bound scrapbook, its cover covered in textured linen. The title painted in careful brushstrokes across the front. "What You Kept." Helen opened the first page. A black and white photo of her and Charles at the old cottage's front steps. A handwritten caption beneath. "Kept the house. Kept the promise." Flip. Jenna's baby, photo covered in cake and frosting next to one of Helen cradling her with flour on her apron. Kept the birthdays. Kept the recipes. Helen's fingers paused at each page like a pianist remembering familiar chords. Jenna leaned against the table. "I didn't want to make a scrapbook of what we lost. I wanted to make one of what you never let go of." Helen exhaled. "That's harder to measure." Exactly why it matters. An hour later, the porch light had clicked on by itself, casting warm shadows over the steps. Dolores arrived with a bottle of elderberry wine and 3 mismatched glasses. "Hope it's chilled enough," she said, holding it up like a trophy. "We need to toast something, don't we?" Jenna lifted her glass. "To women who don't flinch." Helen raised hers. To girls who don't back down. Dolores clinked theirs gently. To the families we choose and the ones we protect from the ones we didn't. Laughter followed, the light kind that felt earned. Inside, Helen stepped into the kitchen to check the kettle, but the mail on the sideboard caught her eye. One envelope thin and official probate court seal stamped in the upper left. She opened it without fanfare. Final notice. All accounts closed. No outstanding claims. Estate matters concluded. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the sound of a lock clicking shut on the inside. She laid the letter on the table beside Jenna's scrapbook and poured the hot water into the teapot. Later that night, after the dishes were rinsed and Dolores had gone, Helen sat at her desk beneath the window. A soft breeze rustled the curtain. Outside, the roses nodded in moonlight. She pulled out a heavy cream envelope and a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, in her own familiar handwriting, she wrote, "To be opened when I'm gone." She paused for a long time, not for lack of words, but to choose them carefully. This wouldn't be another legal document or contingency clause. This would be clarity. She began with a single line. "If you're reading this, then everything went as planned. Or better." Her pen moved deliberately graceful, grounded, never rushed. Outside, the cottage was still. No notifications, no court filings, no headlights on the gravel. Only the sound of legacy settling into its rightful place. And upstairs, Jenna opened the last page of the scrapbook, tucked a small pressed rose between the pages, and whispered to herself. She kept everything that mattered. Back at the desk, Helen folded the letter, slid it into the envelope, and sealed it. But she didn't file it away just yet. She left it on the mantel, beneath the photo of Charles, like one final promise still warm. One more thing not for sale. Not ever. The porch faced west, where the light stayed longest. Helen sat in her favorite chair, a thin shawl over her shoulders, a glass of deep red wine resting in her palm. The horizon burned gold and tangerine, and the roses below swayed in rhythm with the hush of evening. She took a slow sip and listened. Not for footsteps, not for emails, or doorbells, or urgent knocks, just cicadas and the faint rustle of rosemary in the planter box. On the table beside her, the phone buzzed. Voicemail. Tyler. She let it play through the Bluetooth speaker without touching it. "Mom, I don't know what you think you're proving. You've always been stubborn, but this was vindictive. You turned everyone against me. You made Jenna think you're some kind of martyr. I just wanted—" Click. She tapped the screen. Message deleted. The silence after it was cleaner. Jenna came out barefoot, sleeves pushed up, holding 2 small bowls of mint ice cream. "I still can't believe they thought you'd just give it to them," she said, easing into the chair beside Helen. Helen smiled without looking over. "They never understood what it cost me to keep it." Jenna handed her the extra bowl. "They thought the legacy was money." "They thought I was money," Helen replied. "They never saw the backbone underneath it." The sun dipped just below the rooftops. The sky turned soft lavender, and the first crickets began to call. Helen set her spoon down, reached into the wicker basket beside her, and pulled out the sealed cream envelope. She handed it to Jenna. "To be opened when?" Jenna asked. "When it's time," Helen said. "And not a second before." Jenna ran her thumb across the seal. "What is it?" Helen's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "It's the part of me I never got to say out loud." "You'll understand when you need to." Jenna tucked the envelope into her sweater pocket. "Okay." They sat in companionable silence, the kind that felt shared and earned. A screen door creaked open from across the lawn. Dolores walked up the path, holding a single lantern and a small tin of shortbread. She climbed the steps without asking. "It's quiet now." Helen raised her wine glass. "Let's keep it that way." Dolores passed the lantern to Jenna. "For your room, in case the power ever goes out but you still need to see where you came from." Jenna took it reverently. "You always bring the perfect things." "I bring the necessary things," Dolores replied. "Perfect is for holidays. Necessary gets us through the rest." The 3 women sat under the porch light, which flickered once, then steadied. Helen leaned back, the wood groaning slightly beneath her. "You know, I've been thinking about that morning at the funeral." The whisper. Jenna glanced over. "Tyler's?" Helen nodded. "Now we can finally sell her house." Jenna shook her head. "Entitlement disguised as grief." Dolores gave a dry chuckle. Greed's not subtle. It just shows up in pearls and pressed collars. The sun was gone now, the porch bathed in amber, dusk curling in the corners. Jenna stood, stretched, and pressed a kiss to Helen's cheek. I'm heading in. Gonna write a bit. Helen nodded. Start with truth. Add memory later. Jenna smiled and disappeared inside. Dolores followed after a moment, leaving Helen alone on the porch. The lantern flicked on in Jenna's window. The breeze cooled. The world, for the first time in too long, felt wrapped in its own stillness. Helen looked up at the stars just beginning to spark. A whisper had started it. At a casket. A cornered moment meant to wound. But whispers don't last. Helen sipped the last of her wine and whispered back not to Tyler. Not to the wind. Just to herself. He whispered at the funeral. Her eyes never left the dark sky. But I owned the last word.